I stood on the porch with my boots sinking just enough into the red Colorado dust to feel the weight of the moment. You ever have that feeling? Like the land itself is holding its breath with you. The tractor engine was still rattling as it cooled, the iron chain stretched taut from its hitch all the way to the nose of a glossy black truck, now axle-deep in wet, punishing mud. My land, my field, my rules. And that thing, that symbol of arrogance and entitled authority, lay helpless and swallowed up. That, my friend, was no accident. The man who owned it, a fellow named Hank, self-proclaimed Officer Hank, was standing just a few yards away, shirt untucked, cheeks flushed beet red, his voice hoarse from yelling. He was holding a citation book like it could cast a spell or bring down thunder from above. "You've made a big mistake, James," he screamed. "A very big one." And I just watched him. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't move a muscle beyond folding my arms across my chest. The porch groaned under my weight like it agreed with me. Sometimes silence carries more weight than 100 angry words. Maybe you know the type. Hank had that mall cop energy. Retired early from some part-time security job down in Arizona, spent a few years getting ignored, and then bought a house in a gated community called Whispering Pines. HOA included. That was his golden ticket. Gave him a title, a badge, a black truck with a shiny HOA decal on the door, and the authority to bully everyone within spitting distance of his jurisdiction. Except he forgot one thing. I wasn't in his jurisdiction. I lived just outside Whispering Pines, a 30-acre ranch I bought with every last cent I'd earned and saved. Raised 2 kids, 1 dog, and enough cattle to know what a real job feels like. After retiring from the mechanic shop in Texas, I didn't want much. Just peace, fresh air, and maybe a few sunrises that didn't come with honking horns or HOA memos taped to my door. But peaceful men get tested too. It all began 6 weeks before that truck hit the mud. The first sign something was off was a note slapped onto my gate in bright yellow ink. "You are in violation of HOA landscaping regulations. Grass must be trimmed to 4 inches or less." I laughed out loud when I read it. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. This wasn't some manicured suburban plot with picket fences and flower beds. This was ranchland. Raw, honest land that gave as good as it got. My grass didn't need trimming, it needed surviving. So I called the number listed on the note. It rang 3 times before a voice as smug as a banker's bonus answered. "HOA enforcement, Officer Hank speaking." I told him plainly, "Sir, this is private property, not HOA property. You've got no business out here." He had the gall to bark back, "You're adjacent to HOA territory, sir. That gives us shared interests." Shared interests, my ass. He didn't back off. Instead, he got bolder. A week later, his truck was parked just past my gravel boundary road. He had a pair of binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens like he was filming an episode of Animal Planet. I approached slow, calm, and respectful. Knocked on the window. "Afternoon," I said. "You're parked on private land. I'll have to ask you to leave." He rolled the window down half an inch and didn't even look at me when he muttered, "Just patrolling. HOA policy. Let me stop here a second, because maybe you're thinking, well, it's just a parking issue. No harm done." And that's how it always starts. With little encroachments. Petty, polite intrusions. But you and I both know it never stops there. It builds, inch by inch, until one day you wake up and someone's made you a stranger on your own damn land. And it's not the land that changed. It's the rules someone else brought in without your say-so. I reminded him again, firm this time, that this land was not part of Whispering Pines, never had been. He smirked and said, "Then maybe it's time you joined. Fix some of these little problems before they grow." The nerve. Now, I could have let it slide. Could have chalked it up to a wannabe authority figure desperate for relevance. But I've seen how rot spreads when good men say nothing. So I called the sheriff. Daniels is a decent man. No nonsense. Listens more than he talks, which I respect. I showed him the photos I'd taken, the notes, and the property lines clear as day. "I'll talk to him," Daniels said. "But unless he's committing a crime, my hands are tied." That's when I realized this was going to be up to me. I installed cameras. Every angle that faced Whispering Pines got a lens. And they didn't lie. Hank parked on my property 17 times in 3 weeks. Sometimes for 10 minutes. Sometimes for hours. Always watching. Always looming like a crow on a fence post. I brought the footage to the HOA office in town. They had a shiny little building with free coffee and fake smiles. The board president, Denise, was all pearls and poison. She nodded politely as I spoke, then replied in the softest condescension I've ever heard. "Oh, Officer Hank is just ensuring safety. You wouldn't believe how much crime is happening these days." I asked if she meant my ranch. She smiled like a cat with a mouthful of feathers. "I'm sorry you feel that way." That's when I knew. This wasn't Hank. Not just Hank. This was a system. A power-hungry, red-tape-wielding, lawn-mowing empire of soft tyranny dressed up in community newsletters and neighborhood patrols. So I waited. And I planned. Hank had a routine. Same spot. Same hour. Always left his truck during lunch to walk over to the HOA clubhouse, a stone's throw away, but still on my dirt. One Friday afternoon, right after a good rain, I hitched my old tractor to the undercarriage of his black beast and put it into gear. The tires groaned. The chain bit into steel. The truck moved slow, then faster, then sunk into the clay-heavy field like a stone in soup. Axle deep. Helpless. Out of reach. He came back 10 minutes later, red-faced and yelling. But the real show wasn't him. It was the neighbors, watching from behind hedges, blinds, fences, whispering, recording. Some clapped. A few laughed. And now maybe you're wondering what the point of all this was. Why a man who just wanted peace would take it this far. But if you're over 60, if you've lived long enough to see quiet men pushed into corners, then you already know. This isn't about grass height or parking lines. This is about something older. It's about holding ground when someone tells you it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's about staring down the soft tyranny of petty power and saying, "Not today." That truck in the mud wasn't just a warning. It was a statement. You don't step onto a man's land and pretend to own it. Not while he still draws breath. The thing about standing your ground is, once you do it, once you cross that line, you better be ready for the storm that follows. Dragging Hank's black truck into the mud wasn't the end of it. Not even close. It was just the first crack in a dam that had been building pressure for too long. And as any man who's ever dug post holes in spring rain can tell you, once the ground breaks loose, it don't settle easy. It started with the sirens. Not the kind that rush to save lives, but the ones that scream authority. 2 cruisers, lights flashing, tires spinning up gravel and dust as they hit the edge of my property, like they had something to prove. The kind of arrival that announces, "We're in control now." But the land didn't flinch. Neither did I. I was sitting on my porch with Bear at my feet, and my old thermos of black coffee still warm in my hand. I watched them pull up like a man watches a thundercloud roll over dry hills, ready for rain, but not afraid of lightning. Officer Hank was pacing like a caged dog near his sunken truck, muttering into a radio, waving his arms toward my house. I could hear bits and pieces. He dragged it. Destruction of property. Arrest. Immediate action. You'd think I'd taken a crowbar to his spine. But I hadn't touched him. Only the earth had. The mud swallowed his truck like it had a personal grudge, and maybe it did. Maybe the land gets tired of arrogance, too. But then something strange happened. A third vehicle rolled up, unmarked, tinted windows, and quiet like it didn't need noise to announce importance. When the door opened, out stepped a man with silver hair and presence you could feel in your chest. County Commissioner, stitched right there on the back of his jacket, bold white letters like a warning label. He didn't run, didn't shout. He walked like a man who knew people listened when he spoke. "You James Walker?" he asked, removing his sunglasses as he approached my porch. I nodded, calm and steady. "What's going on here?" Before I could open my mouth, Hank jumped in like a dog seeing a squirrel. "He vandalized HOA property. That truck's city certified. He pulled it onto his land without consent." The commissioner didn't even look at him. Just held up a hand. Quiet. Authority without shouting. Hank's mouth clicked shut like someone had hit mute on a remote. I told my side. Straight. Honest. No flourishes. I explained the pattern. How Hank had been parking on my land daily, photographing my property, stepping over the boundary without permission. I showed him footage on my tablet. Clear shots. Time-stamped. Legal as it gets. I handed over a laminated survey map, county certified, orange markers every 20 feet. The commissioner studied it like a man who's seen too many lies and was hoping for one moment of truth. "You parked this vehicle here," he asked Hank, his voice low but loaded, "on land you do not own and outside HOA jurisdiction?" "I was monitoring potential violations," Hank tried. "He's not maintaining community standards. This isn't community property," the commissioner snapped. "This is private ranch land." His words didn't rise, but they hit harder than any shout. "You crossed a line." It wasn't a moment of victory. It was a moment of clarity. And sometimes clarity is more dangerous than conflict. Because that's when the real war begins, when the other side realizes they can't win by rules anymore, so they try to bend them. After the truck got hauled out, mud dragging from its tires like shame, the whispers began. Folks from the HOA watched from behind manicured bushes and freshly painted shutters. Some gave me a nod. Others looked away like they were afraid I might start dragging other trucks next. Truth is, I didn't want trouble. But trouble wants men who won't kneel. That evening, I found the first note, pinned to my gate with a rusted hunting knife. No name, no signature, just 5 words scrawled in thick red marker. This ain't over, cowboy. You ever feel your blood turn cold? Not from fear, but from fury that settles deep and slow. I didn't sleep that night. Not from nerves. From principle. I've dealt with snakes, coyotes, and the kind of storms that rattle fence posts out of the ground. But this wasn't nature. This was personal, premeditated, human. The next morning I walked the eastern fence line. Every 20 feet, I checked the signs, made sure the paint was fresh. I replaced 2 sagging posts and added motion-triggered lights tucked into the tree line. Bear followed me the whole way, ears twitching, hackles raised. He knew. Animals always do. Later that week, Ellie came to visit. My daughter, 16 and fierce like her mother used to be. She brought cookies for Bear and questions I hadn't answered yet. "Dad," she said, her eyes catching the spray-painted smear across the side of the barn. "Did someone do that?" I didn't lie. I nodded. "They think intimidation works." She frowned. "Then they don't know you. And that's the problem, isn't it? These people in pressed shirts and HOA decals, they think rural means stupid. They think quiet means submissive. They think because we don't write letters to the editor or shout at school board meetings that we'll roll over when they come for what's ours. They don't understand that some men were raised on land that doesn't forgive weakness." So I made 2 calls. First, to Rick Mason, old Army buddy turned security expert. Retired early, builds surveillance systems for contractors now. He showed up 2 days later in a pickup filled with enough tech to make the NSA sweat. Trail cams, heat sensors, night vision drones. He even had a tower cam disguised as a birdhouse. Second, I called my lawyer. Told her everything. She wasn't shocked. Whispering Pines had a reputation, she said. Subtle pressure. Legal loopholes. Boundary adjustments. Her tone changed when I mentioned the note and the knife. "We can file for a restraining order," she said. "But I'd recommend going public. Exposure makes them back off faster than courtrooms." She was right. Bullies don't like spotlights. But I still wasn't ready to go wide. Not yet. I needed them to make the next move. And they did. 3 nights later, just past 2 in the morning, the gate alarm buzzed. I woke fast. No panic. Just habit. Years of early shifts at the garage trained my body to rise like a coiled spring. I grabbed my flashlight, strapped on the old Winchester, not to use, but to show. Bear was already at the door, growling low. I stepped onto the porch, and in the distance I saw them. 3 figures moving slow along the fence line. Hooded. Careful. One had bolt cutters. Another held a gas can. They weren't there to talk. I called out, "You're on private property. Leave now." They froze. One turned the flashlight directly into my eyes, blinding me for a second. Then I heard the voice. "You should have joined the HOA, Walker." "Hank." He stepped forward, and right then the drone kicked in. Soft hum overhead. Red laser dot landed on his chest. The speakers buzzed to life with Rick's voice. "Smile, gentlemen. You're live on county surveillance." They bolted. Scrambled like raccoons caught in headlights. Hank slipped in the mud trench I'd rebuilt near the fence. The other 2 tripped over brush. But they made it out. For now. That morning, I downloaded the footage. Every frame. Clear faces. Clear intent. I didn't take it to the police. Not yet. I had a better plan. Next stop, the HOA office. Because if they wanted war, I'd make sure the battlefield was visible to everyone. Not hidden in paperwork. Not buried in legalese. No. They'd face it under open sky, where men stand tall, and the land remembers every boot that ever tried to claim it. By the time I walked through the doors of the Whispering Pines HOA office with that flash drive in my front pocket, I wasn't angry. I was resolved. There's a difference, and men our age know it. Anger makes you shout. Resolve makes you quiet, steady, like a stone right before it drops through glass. Denise, the board president, looked up from behind her polished oak desk when I entered, flashing that sugary smile of hers that never quite reached her eyes. "Mr. Walker," she said sweetly, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" I didn't answer her question. I walked to her desk, took out the flash drive, and set it down without ceremony. "You might want to plug that in." She paused, just for a second. Then her fingers moved toward the USB port like they were made of lead. When the footage began, 3 men in hoodies, bolt cutters, gasoline, my fence, they didn't blink. But the moment the drone hovered overhead and Hank's voice came clear through the speaker, "You should have joined the HOA." I saw the color drain from her face like someone pulled a plug. "This is an internal matter," she muttered, reaching for the drive like she could make it disappear. I put my hand over hers, gently but firm. "No, ma'am. This is now a legal matter. You can call the sheriff yourself and report it, or I can walk this down to every news station in the county. Up to you." For once, Denise had nothing clever to say. Her eyes darted toward the back office. I didn't look to see who was listening. Didn't need to. The message was already sent. That evening, I thought it might be over. But I've lived too long to believe trouble disappears just because you showed it the truth. Men like Hank, organizations like that HOA, they don't retreat. They adapt. They shift their weight from boots to paperwork, from intimidation to sabotage. And that's exactly what came next. Around midnight, I was locking up the barn when I noticed the irrigation lights were off. That's odd, I thought, because they're solar triggered. I walked the length of the eastern field with Bear trotting beside me, ears up, tail stiff. When I reached the control box, my stomach sank. The main power cord had been sliced clean through, like with garden shears. The casing was smashed, circuits hanging like a gutted fish. And in thick black spray paint, across the side, "Obey." No signatures. No fingerprints I could see. Just a message. Not a warning, an order. My hands curled into fists without thinking. You see, when they mess with your fence, they're testing. When they cut your water, they're trying to break you. It wasn't just vandalism now. It was economic warfare. The East Field needed that water. My hay was already drying out, and it hadn't rained in 5 days. If they killed that crop, they'd choke my cattle, my revenue, and maybe force me to sell just to survive the next season. And that, I realized, was their plan all along. Not just harassment. They wanted me out. Quietly. Legally. Like it was all just coincidence. But men like us, we've seen coincidence wear a mask before. We know what organized pressure feels like, even when it shows up in a tie and carries a clipboard. So I called Ellie. She was still awake, studying late. I told her to come home early from school the next day, and to wear boots. "Why?" she asked. I said, "Because we're going to get our hands dirty. And it's time you learn why this ranch matters." The next morning, before she arrived, I walked the fence line again. This time not just to check. I was planning, preparing. The part of the property that bordered Whispering Pines was flat, quiet, and easy to cross. Too easy. Years back, my grandfather had dug a rain trench that snaked through that same side. It hadn't been used in a decade, but the shape was still there, faint like an old scar. I spent the entire day clearing it out, packing the base with wet clay hauled up from the creek, smoothing it with a layer of dry dirt until it looked just like any other stretch of pasture. A trap? Maybe. But only for trespassers. Ellie arrived late afternoon, stepping out of her truck with that determined look she gets from her mom. I walked her to the barn, showed her the damage. She didn't say much, just nodded. "Let's fix it," she said, already rolling up her sleeves. We worked until dark, side by side, rewiring the system, rigging up temporary lighting, patching what we could. She asked if I was planning to call the sheriff again. I shook my head. This time, we do it our way. That night, we didn't sleep much. Bear stayed on high alert, pacing near the eastern fence like he knew the air had shifted. Sometime around 3 a.m., I heard the distant crunch of gravel. I peeked through the kitchen window and saw the familiar silhouette of Hank's truck. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another vehicle followed behind, smaller, newer, probably some HOA lawyer or surveyor. They stopped near the eastern field, the same patch I'd been working on all day. I stepped out onto the porch with my phone, started recording, and watched. They drove further than usual, all the way to the heart of the trench. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The front tires hit first, dipped slightly. Then the rear dropped, fast. The truck rocked forward, tried to reverse, but the wheels just spun and spit mud. Within seconds, the whole undercarriage was stuck. You'd have thought someone tied it down with anchors. I watched Hank jump out, shouting into his phone, boots slipping in clay. The other man, a thin guy in slacks, ran the opposite direction, lost his footing, and slid into a shallow ditch, face first. I didn't laugh, but I didn't feel bad either. 20 minutes later, the sheriff arrived. Not Daniels this time. He was out on another call, but his deputy, a no-nonsense woman named Clara. She took one look at the scene, raised a brow, and asked, "Again?" I handed her the video footage, clear as day. She didn't argue. Just called for a tow and started filling out a report. Hank tried again to play the victim. "Entrapment," he shouted. "This is entrapment." Clara didn't blink. "Sir, you've been warned. Multiple times. You entered private property, passed clearly marked boundaries, and drove a vehicle into an area that's been monitored since last week. That's not entrapment. That's just dumb." The surveyor, once he got up, mumbled something about checking easement lines. Clara asked if he had a warrant or county approval. He didn't. She sent him packing with a warning. When they towed the truck out, it took 2 rigs and a lot of grumbling. The tow driver looked at me as he packed up and said, "Whatever you're doing here, man, keep doing it." I gave him a nod, but inside I knew this wasn't the end. Later that night, as Ellie and I sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the stars, a car pulled slowly into the driveway. It wasn't a cruiser, wasn't a neighbor. It was a luxury sedan, clean and black, with windows tinted so dark you couldn't see the driver until he stepped out. A man in a tailored suit. Slick shoes that didn't belong anywhere near a field. "Good evening," he said, all smiles and smoothness. "I'm Richard Lanes, senior legal counsel for Whispering Pines." I didn't shake his hand. Just waited. "We'd like to offer a resolution," he continued. 2 years of waived HOA fees, full access to community facilities, and a generous compensation package for partial use of your eastern acreage. Ellie stared at him like he'd grown a second head. I didn't blink. "You're offering me money to let the people who cut my wires, stalk my property, and threaten my daughter, use my land?" He cleared his throat. "Let's not dwell on misunderstandings. This is a chance to move forward. Clean slate." I took a step closer, kept my voice low. "You ever try to polish a turd, Richard?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You dress it up, add a little shine, maybe put it in a silver box, but it's still what it is. Now get off my land." He adjusted his tie, walked back to the car without another word. But just before he closed the door, he looked at me and said something that stuck like a thorn. "This land may be yours today, Mr. Walker, but all fences fall eventually." And with that, he was gone. Tail lights bleeding red down the dirt road like the last warning of a coming storm. I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, heart steady, eyes cold, with Ellie beside me and Bear watching the tree line. Let them come. Let them push. Because I wasn't just defending a ranch anymore. I was defending the idea that a man's land still meant something. And I'd be damned if they tore that down without a fight. I didn't sleep the night Richard Lanes paid me that visit. I just sat in my chair near the window, mug of cold coffee in my hand, and stared into the dark. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind scratching the eaves of the house made me lean just a little forward, wondering if it was them back again. You get to a certain age, you stop believing in monsters under the bed. But what they don't tell you is, some monsters wear suits and drive quiet luxury sedans. And those are the ones that don't knock twice. The next morning, I found a letter nailed to my mailbox. Not slid inside. Not mailed. Nailed. A big galvanized spike driven right through the wood. The letter was typed, too clean, too official looking, with the kind of language that only lawyers and politicians understand. Notice of mandatory annexation, review eastern parcels. It was stamped with county ink, 3 signatures at the bottom, and filled with phrases like community access, zone green expansion, and preliminary review of boundary adjustments. All I saw was this: they were making their move. I drove straight to the county clerk's office, letter in hand. Laura, the woman behind the desk, was young, overworked, and polite in that way folks are when they're trying not to be the next target. She glanced over the letter and sighed. "It's a proposal, Mr. Walker. Not law. They're requesting the county consider redrawing the HOA boundaries to increase community cohesion and safety. It hasn't been approved yet, but they're trying to box me in, aren't they?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "They've tried similar moves before. Nothing quite this bold, though. That alone told me everything. This wasn't about property lines. This was about control. The kind of slow, legal stranglehold that squeezes until selling out seems like mercy." I thanked her and left, but when I got back to the ranch, Ellie was standing at the gate holding another letter. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the bank. A mortgage review, despite my property being paid off years ago, minus a small home improvement loan I'd taken to rebuild after a storm. Now they were reassessing asset risk based on community development concerns. I called the bank immediately. Got transferred 3 times before someone read a prepared line about anonymous reports of structural vulnerabilities and disputes regarding land status. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. They were hitting me from every side, legal, financial, psychological, trying to bury me in paper cuts before I could bleed them dry with truth. That evening, Ellie sat next to me on the porch, arms wrapped around her knees. "Why would they do this, Dad? It's just land." I looked out at the fading sun, the rustle of cattle moving slow across the fields. "It's not just land to them," I said. "It's power, control. They don't care about soil or fences. They care about obedience. If someone like me can say no and stand firm, then it threatens the whole game they're playing. So they push harder." She didn't say anything, but I could see it in her eyes. That fire. She was her mother's daughter in all the best ways. The next morning, I printed up 100 flyers. Simple. Black ink on white paper. "Whispering Pines HOA is attempting to annex my land. I am not a member. I do not want to be. I need your help." Ellie and I walked from house to house, not just inside Whispering Pines, but around it. The neighbors near the edges, the folks who weren't fully pulled into the HOA's web yet. Some didn't answer. Some pretended not to care. But more than a few did. A retired firefighter named Mr. Dawson invited us in and told us they fined him $200 for having an American flag lit up overnight. A woman named Maria whispered that they inspected her backyard without notice. A young couple said they'd been bullied into repainting their fence 3 times in one summer. We weren't alone. By the end of the week, we had 30 families willing to sign a petition. A few said they'd show up at the county hearing too. That little flame of hope flickered brighter. But fire attracts attention. Late Friday night, just as a storm was rolling in, I heard the bang. A loud, dry crack that didn't sound like thunder. I grabbed the flashlight, Bear already barking like mad. When I got to the barn, my chest tightened. It was in flames. Smoke poured through the slats like screams. Rain started to fall, but the fire fought back like it had a will of its own. I ran, kicked open the side doors. Ellie followed, barefoot, still in her sleep shirt, yelling. The animals. We untied ropes, pushed open gates, led the cows and horses out into the storm. But the back stall, where Pepper, Ellie's rescue goat, slept, was blocked. A beam had fallen, flames licking around it. Without thinking, I grabbed it, shoulder pressed against charred wood, skin searing. Ellie cried out as I pushed it aside, lifted Pepper, and ran back through the haze. We made it out just as the roof caved in. We stood in the mud, drenched and coughing, watching everything burn. Everything. Sheriff Daniels arrived minutes later. Quiet. Serious. He looked around, asked questions, then called over one of his deputies. They found it behind the hay bales, a red gas can half empty. Daniels didn't say much, just shook his head and said, "This wasn't lightning, James." I already knew that. The next morning, the barn was still smoking. Charred beams, twisted metal, the smell of loss. Ellie didn't talk, just sat on the steps, Pepper in her lap, tears drying on her cheeks. Bear lay beside her, ears twitching at every sound. I looked at them, then at the land, and something inside me changed. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to win. I called Rick. "It's time," I told him. "Go loud." By sunset, Rick rolled in with another truck, this one stacked high with gear. We built a wildlife camera tower near the back tree line, added 2 more drones, infrared sensors, and solar spotlights that could light up a field like a football stadium. But the real weapon wasn't hardware. It was the truth. That night, I compiled every incident, photos, videos, damage reports, testimony. Then I wrote one long email. I sent it to every news outlet in the region. I sent it to YouTubers known for covering HOA abuses. I sent it to a lawyer named Helen Kessler, who'd taken down a corrupt board 2 counties over. And I hit send. Then I waited. The response was almost instant. Helen called within hours. "Pro bono," she said. "I've been waiting for a case like this." The local news came out the next morning. Cameras, mics, the whole show. Ellie gave them a tour of the damage. Bear made his on-screen debut, sitting like a proud sentinel by the remains of the barn. And just like that, the story caught fire, this time in the right way. Whispers turned into headlines. Support started pouring in. People offered money, supplies, even free labor to rebuild. One man, a carpenter from 3 towns over, showed up with a pickup full of lumber and said, "No one burns a man off his land on my watch." By the end of the week, the HOA board was on the defensive. Emails leaked. Former members came forward. The county commissioner announced a hold on all annexation proposals. And me? I stood in the middle of my field, wind on my face, watching as neighbors I'd never met before lifted new beams and hammered nails into fresh pine. The new barn would be stronger, bigger, better. And on the front of it, Ellie painted a sign, Walker Ranch. Never for sale. I knew then what I'd always known deep down. They could send lawyers, bullies, even fire. But they didn't understand one thing. This land doesn't belong to them. And neither do I. The thing about rebuilding something from ashes, whether it's a barn, a reputation, or your right to stand your ground, is that you find out real quick who's with you and who's just been watching. And let me tell you, after the fire, after the cameras, after the emails and the headlines and the sudden parade of support, there was one thing I still couldn't shake. That feeling you get when you know the war ain't over, just quiet. The barn was going up fast thanks to folks from all over. Men I'd never met hammered beams beside Ellie. Women dropped off baked goods and supplies. Veterans showed up with gloves and drills and fire in their eyes. They didn't come for thanks. They came because something about this fight felt familiar. A man's land. His fence line. His right to say no. That hits deep when you've seen too many places where no stopped meaning anything. And as the frame of the new barn took shape under the bright Colorado sun, I found myself smiling again. Not because I thought it was done, but because I wasn't alone anymore. Still, I kept my eyes open. I checked the cameras every night, walked the fence with Bear at dusk and dawn. Ellie started calling our patrols the Lantern Watch, and I didn't have the heart to correct her. That dog never left my side. He didn't bark as much anymore, just watched. Silent. Focused. Like he knew something was still out there. Then one night, just after the sun dipped below the ridge, and we were closing up the new barn, Bear stopped cold. His ears perked, tail stiff, nose to the wind. Ellie froze too. "You hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. A soft scrape. Not loud, but deliberate. I turned off the work light, grabbed my flashlight, and moved quiet toward the eastern fence. Through the trees, I spotted a figure. Tall, broad, not moving. Just standing there, half shrouded by shadow, just on the other side of the property line. Watching. I didn't say a word. Neither did Bear. I just stood still and stared. After nearly a full minute, the figure turned and walked off. No words. No threat. Just a silent reminder, we see you. The next morning, I checked the security logs. One motion sensor had been tripped at 2:47 a.m., right at the back gate. Nothing on camera but rustling leaves. Whoever it was, they were smart. But I knew that walk, that posture, that arrogance trying to wear a cloak of silence. It was Hank. Even after the footage, the fire, the legal fallout, that man was still lurking around like a rattlesnake that refused to admit its fangs were busted. 2 days later, the sheriff called. "You're going to want to see this," Daniels said. When I got to the office, he didn't bother with a seat. Just pulled up a video on his monitor. It was grainy, filmed in the rain, but clear enough. A figure moving across my field with a limp, his right ankle dragging just slightly. A limp Hank picked up weeks ago falling into my clay trench. The figure approached the barn, my old barn, carrying something. Then a flash. Then fire. Daniels paused the video. "With this, we can press arson charges," he said. I nodded. "Do it." I thought that would be the end. But the next night, I got another letter. No stamp. Just dropped at the gate. No words this time. Just a torn photograph. It was a picture of my ranch from years ago, when Ellie was small, when her mama was still alive. The image had been burned along the edges. Charred. I handed it to Daniels, who looked at me and said, "He's slipping, James." Desperate. But I wasn't scared. I was past fear. I'd moved into something colder, something older than anger. Determination. Purpose. Ellie, sensing it too, started writing more. Her blog, Fence Line Diaries, started gaining traction. People from around the country were reading it. Some shared their own HOA horror stories. One man from Georgia wrote about how they fined him for planting a garden in his front yard. A woman from Nevada shared how her HOA banned her from hanging a flag from her own porch. The stories kept coming, and with every one, the picture became clearer. This wasn't just about me. It was a pattern, a structure, a slow erosion of freedom masked as community improvement. The media picked up on it again. A segment on a national news show ran with the headline, Rancher versus HOA, when boundaries become battlefields. My inbox flooded. People asking how to protect their land, asking how we'd stood up, asking if they could help. Some donated money. Others offered legal services. And then one morning, Ellie showed me something I hadn't expected, a letter from a Whispering Pines resident, a former HOA board member. He wrote anonymously, but his message was clear. We discussed plans to apply pressure to your land. Financial, legal, social. The goal was to make you sell. I'm sorry. I gave the letter to Helen, our lawyer. She smiled and said, we now have a conspiracy case. The county board moved fast after that. A formal investigation into Whispering Pines was opened. The annexation proposal was denied. A cease and desist was issued against any further HOA expansion beyond its original zone. Denise resigned that same day. But the news I didn't expect came just a few days later. Hank had disappeared. Not just from Whispering Pines, but from the county. His house was empty. His phone off. No forwarding address. For a moment, I thought maybe the man had finally understood he lost. Maybe he moved on. But something in my gut said otherwise. I didn't voice it to Ellie. I didn't want her worrying. But I kept a shell in the chamber and the motion sensors fresh. Just in case. A week passed. Then two. The barn was finished. Painted. Stronger than before. Ellie added a final touch, a wooden sign hand-carved that read, Walker Ranch. EST 2013. Never for sale. Then one night it happened. The sensors screamed at 3:08 a.m. I grabbed the flashlight, the rifle, and stepped onto the porch. 3 figures. One with bolt cutters. Another with a canister. And Hank, leading them through the trees like it was his personal crusade. I shouted, stop right there. This is your final warning. They froze. But then Hank moved. Ran. I gave chase. Bear beside me, low and growling. Hank tried to leap the ditch, the same damn trench that had swallowed his truck weeks ago. But he slipped again, hit the mud face first. Daniels and his deputies arrived seconds later, having already been on alert after the earlier threats. They arrested all 3. Hank looked at me, mud in his teeth, eyes burning. I was protecting this community, he spat. I stepped close. You weren't protecting anything. You were trying to own it. But you forgot one thing. This land belongs to those who respect it, not those who think a title makes them king. He didn't reply. He just stared, broken and bound. They hauled him off, and this time it was over. In the following days, the HOA board collapsed. New leadership was elected, people who believed in peace, not power. The investigation cleared my name and exposed years of questionable practices. My mortgage review was reversed. My land safe. My barn rebuilt. My family stronger. Ellie's blog went viral. Bear got featured in a national article as the dog who defended a ranch. And me? I went back to my porch. I still walk the fence every morning. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because I know what it costs to keep something sacred. And I'll pay that cost again if I have to. They say fences fall, that nothing lasts forever. But sometimes, if you fight hard enough, stand firm enough, love deep enough, they don't. Sometimes, a fence becomes more than wood and wire. It becomes a line in the soul. And on this side of the line I stand. Still. Proud. Unmoved.